Saudações, galera, começando mais um 45 Jardas. Vocês estão vendo aqui, temos um convidado super especial, Robert Mays, quem não conhece, apresentador do The Football Show do The Athletic, mas tem uma história vastíssima aí, e vou falar em inglês agora para não deixar ele confuso. Hi Robert, how are you doing? I was talking about you and saying that you the Athletic Football Show, you are the host. I'm telling our listeners. And Robert, please, if you can talk a little bit about your how you started in football and how when did you decide to work with football?
First of all, I wish I spoke Portuguese. It'd be easier, and I would be a much more well-rounded person. But I started at Grantland in 2011. It's actually tomorrow will be 10 years to the day that I moved out there to work at Grantland. And when I got there, it was very strange. At that time, watching a website, we were all kind of just trying to patch it together the best that we could. So I filled a lot of different roles at that place. And a couple of years in, as we were trying to figure out what I should be doing, where I should focus, I think we all kind of understood that there was an opening to be the secondary football writer on the site. And Barnwell was somebody who, it was so easy to work with Barnwell because he writes so much that you never had to write about anything. You always got to write about whatever you wanted because he was covering everything. So if something happened, he would just write about it. So I got to just kind of chase whatever I was curious about. So that's when I started doing it. Football was always my favorite sport. I grew up playing football. I loved it. I loved the NFL. So when that opening happened at the site, it just made sense for me to do it. And from about that time, I would say since 2012, 2013, I pretty much covered the league full time. And I think 2013, I could comfortably say was my first year kind of as an NFL writer. So we're probably moving into like season 8 and then probably like season 6 or so of me reporting about the league full time, actually making phone calls and going out to games and doing stories and everything else. I want to say the first game I really covered live was the Colin Kaepernick huge game against the Packers in the playoffs at Candlestick Park, where he just went off. That was really the first playoff big time NFL game I can remember covering. So I would say that was the start of my career covering the league.
Pode, Mateus.
About that, I mean, you got the chance to work with a lot of very famous, very popular writers. Barnwell we've mentioned, obviously Bill Simmons with Grantland, and we just wanted to ask because we're also big fans of Peter King. How was it for you to get the chance to work with him at Sports Illustrated? I mean, you got to cover. I believe you got to cover even the Super Bowl around there. So how was that whole experience like? As far as journalists go.
It was awesome. I mean, I think with both Bill and Peter, one of my favorite parts of working with both of them closely is just getting an understanding of why they're so successful. With Bill, it was just this constant idea generation that he was able to come up with, where I've never seen someone consume media with the dexterity that Bill Simmons does. I mean, he can be doing like 4 different things at once. He'll be responding to emails on an iPad while watching TV on one corner of the room and watching a game on another corner of the room. He's just always consuming. And I think that, and he's a voracious reader as well. I mean, it really kind of taught me that in order to produce content, you have to consume content. And that was a really useful lesson. Yeah. And with Peter just, it was so cool to watch how invested Peter was in the MMQB succeeding. Peter wasn't just this guy who was the figurehead and leader of the site, and he was his hands-off presence. He was somebody that always wanted to make individual stories better and have a hand in the content that the site was creating and the vision and how it was being shaped, and genuinely one of the nicest people that you'll ever meet in the entire world. I mean, somebody that is just immensely kind and helpful. I mean, even after I've left there, I would never hesitate to send Peter a message and ask him for something, whether it's a bit of advice or a favor or how to get in touch with somebody. I think that he was just such a great presence for somebody who was young in the business, trying to figure out the ways I wanted to attack my career and stories and things like that. I mean, I only spent, I think, 4 or 5 months working with them, and it was really important. It was an important time for me to see a different side of how people went about the business, because I'd really only been at Grantland where we didn't have that traditional reporting approach to things. And watching Peter, who is maybe the most traditional, NFL reporter in certain ways, understanding how he viewed the league and how he covered it, even that short time, I think was really important for me to understand the type of reporter and type of person and type of writer I wanted to be in the next phase of my career.
Yeah, so you got to see kind of the both sides, like something more modern, more, started with a website and got into the whole basically big podcast thing that is today with The Ringer. That's continuation with Grantland. And you got to see Peter King, like classic, huge stories for Sports Illustrated and how to go about that. So yeah, I think that, as you said, it was short time but sweet. I guess it's kind of how you define that.
Yeah, and I think that that's exactly right. I think that if you look at the way I try to do my work now, I think it is kind of a combination of those two things. The show we have, I think, is a fairly modern NFL podcast in the same way that you get at other places that don't have as much of a reporting background. And then I still try to sprinkle some of that in. And every once in a while, there's some tonal issues there. It's hard to combine those two things all the time when you're a commentator and a reporter and you wear those different hats at different times. But I do think it's fun. I think it's fun to try to blend those in a way that works and blend those in a way that accentuates the other and kind of make the sum bigger than, the sum of the parts bigger than them individually. So yeah, it's a fun thing. And I definitely do think that what I'm trying to do now is taking little lessons I learned at both of those places and from both of those people.
And Robert, you made a huge change in your life last year because you changed your job during the pandemic. So I know it's hard to talk about a routine with this life during the pandemic, but how was cover the NFL during the pandemic, and how's your routine working? I know that you went for some games last year, but I know that it's not the same thing that before. How's your routine today?
It's interesting. I have to rely a lot more on phone calls and a lot more on being diligent about keeping up with people. There are, like, for example, when the offseason started, I just kind of had a list on my phone in the notes app. It was like people to catch up with. And I had to kind of consciously say, like, I haven't talked to this person in a while. I haven't talked to this person in a while. And it's all over the phone. Sometimes I think if these are moments where the season would have been happening and I would have been around more people, that list of phone calls might not have been as necessary. But I think it was in that moment. I think the fall was even more obvious and more apparent with how important that was. Because every August, typically, I'll go around and visit with people at training camps and stuff. And this year I couldn't do that. So it really was a situation where I felt like I had to be making more calls and catching up with people in different ways. And I didn't like it and don't like it. So I'm very excited to hopefully get back to a place, maybe as soon as July, August this year, where it's realistic for me to be on the road, going to different places and visiting with different people. And I'm a sit-down conversation person. The phone is fine. But as often as possible, I love just being able to sit in a room with someone and kick around ideas. And that's one of my favorite things is, I'm not the most plugged in NFL reporter in the world, but I have a few people that I really like talking to, and being able to explore just conceptual ideas with people who know more about football than me is my favorite part of this entire job. I mean, so.
I know that it's a different world. I used to cover soccer in Brazil, and some players that you create a different relationship. Sometimes you have the personal number, and is normal have the same relationship in USA, for example. You have this kind of relationship with some players too.
A couple, not many. Not many. I think that for whatever reason, I think that that's a little bit of a different relationship. I think that. That's like an inside reporting thing about like asking for phone numbers and getting in touch with guys. I feel more comfortable almost talking to the coaches at this point because they're my age. I've gotten to a place now where, some of the guys who are a little bit older in the league or have been around for a little while, those are relationships I feel comfortable with. But now we're in a position where a lot of the head coaches in the NFL are a couple of years older than me. So I almost relate more to them than I do to the players. To a certain degree, just because of that. And I mean, it's kind of funny. I think that when I was 23 and I'm talking to a player, it's easy for me to be like, oh, you live in your apartment and your girlfriend and you go out. What do you do? And for example, I remember I wrote about Travis Kelce in 2014. And so in 2014, I was 27, and I want to say Travis was like 25. And we talked about that kind of stuff. And we were sitting, I was like, what do you do at night? Where the bars here? Like, how do you spend your time? And now, I'll be talking to a head coach, and I recently we bought a house, and I can talk to them about that because they're in that stage of their lives. So you almost see that transition over that 10-year period. And I think that's shown up in the people that I communicate with the most.
Yeah, absolutely. It's it changes with time, right? You also get more experience, more connections.
I hope I'm not talking to 22-year-old NFL players about where they're going out at night now, because that's not something that is going to be a part of my lifestyle any longer.
Yeah, and talking about talking to players and the off season, which is where you do most of that kind of thing. This has been a very different off season. Obviously, last year there was still a lot of uncertainty about where things were going to be. This year, even though this pandemic's still going on, there's more of a plan, I think, about that. So, and in this offseason in particular, with Deshaun Watson and everything that's happening to him, with Stafford and Goff changing teams, a lot of crazy stuff going on. And we haven't seen that much movement, at least as quarterback goes, in a while. And some things can still happen. With free agency going on and teams kind of not knowing really how to go about that. With the salary cap diminishing, and you have the draft with players that haven't played last year. Does this offseason feel very different as far as movement goes and everything that's going on in the NFL than past years? How do you assess this offseason in regards to that, with how the NFL is right now and how it's dealing with it, and how's that for you?
I mean, I think it's very different. I mean, just you see the cuts happening, and I think there are going to be a decent amount of cuts happen. I don't think they're going to be big name guys that lose their jobs. I mean, Eric Fisher and Mitchell Schwartz, I think, are right there at the top of the type of players who are going to be cut this offseason. And I think that the available labor this year is going to look a lot different than it typically does in a normal free agency year, just because we're not used to this pool of players and this quality pool of players being available with this little money. There just aren't that many teams that can really throw it around. So I think this year the elements of supply and demand just look different than they normally do for the NFL in a typical offseason. And you talked about the quarterback movement, and we'll see how real that is, right? I mean, Now it's so easy to be like, Deshaun Watson and Russell Wilson might change teams. And that possibility informs how you think about movement as a whole. But if they don't, that's a lot of noise that never really resulted in anything. But I do think even without that, there's still been more movement at that spot than there typically would be. And I think the Lions are a really good example, right? So the Lions are drafting 7th this year, okay? Mm-hmm. The Lions had Matthew Stafford. There was a long time. There was like a 10-year period where it was hard to find quarterbacks in the draft. We had entire drafts where it was E.J. Manuel at like 17th overall and then Geno Smith in the second round. And even in drafts where there were quarterback options in the top 10, it didn't always work out. You look back to that 2011 draft and Christian Ponder and Blaine Gabbert and guys like that just didn't end up working. So I think if you were a team like Detroit, even if you had the 7th overall pick in a typical year, you would want to hold on to Matthew Stafford, even if it didn't make sense for your timeline and your vision and everything else, just because there was such a scarcity of quality or even capable quarterback play that letting somebody like that go was really hard to imagine. Now, if the Lions want to take Trey Lance at 7 and he's there, they can. And he looks like a capable starter. So I just think that elements like that combined with a certain group of quarterbacks aging out, I think player empowerment in general has grown. I think there are a lot of different factors that have kind of led to that quarterback movement that, again, kind of creates this environment and atmosphere around an offseason that we've never really seen before when you combine it with all the financial aspects that are occurring and going on with the league.
Yeah, that was my second point now about because you have teams that maybe are a bit more willing to be more aggressive with the quarterbacks, to the Rams. They gave up on Jared Goff, and that's something that 15 years ago I don't think they would have. And you have that and that evolution of the game of how general managers and whatever see their teams, and you put that together with the player empowerment movement that we see with Russell Wilson and Deshaun Watson. And I think maybe do believe this year maybe is is a sign of things to come, or is just a perfect confluence of events?
I don't know if we'll see something like this every year, but I do think that the underlying causes of this may create a slightly different feel to coming off seasons. Maybe there is a quarterback who 10 years ago wouldn't have been as quick to complain about his surroundings, the way that they've surrounded him with talent. And now he's going to say through the media, I want more help. I don't feel like this is working for me. I don't think they've done the right things. I think if guys look at kind of the fallout that's happened so far, especially with the Deshaun Watson situation, I mean, can you think of anybody that's on the Texans side in this fight? Nobody. Really. I just think that's new. I think that aspect of it is definitely new, because previously it was really easy for the teams to shape the narrative because they were the ones who could really control the messaging through the media and everything else. And now I think the players, one, are more media savvy, two, they're investing more in how their media presence and approach is curated, whether it's with their agencies, all of that other stuff. And three, they have a direct line. They can tweet whatever they want. They can shape their own message now in ways that just weren't possible before. So I think that, again, it's coming from a lot of different directions, why it might be a little bit more effective to kind of create that messaging now than it has been in the past.
Absolutely.
Robert, in every show, I say that's the craziest offseason that I ever saw. And based on that, you live in Chicago. You are a Bears fan, and I really want to know that do you believe even a little bit that the number 3 will have a different owner in Chicago next season?
That who will?
The number 3, the jersey, the number 3 will have a new owner.
That's very soccer parlance. The number jersey referring to the guy.
Yeah, sorry.
I certainly hope so. It's so funny. It's difficult for me to envision the Seahawks doing it, solely because if you look at the package the Bears can offer, I just don't know if the Seahawks are in a better spot if they have 3 first-round picks and maybe 1 defensive starter from the Bears than they would be if they had Russell Wilson. And they have to really want to get rid of him, or he has to really want out of there, be willing to put some pressure on them for them to take a package like that. I think Deshaun Watson might end up going for something like that because he has been steadfast in his stance that I'm not moving. I'm not staying. There's no way I'm coming back here. Trade me. Russell Wilson hasn't taken it up to that notch yet. So until he does, I just think anything the Bears could offer wouldn't be conducive to the Seahawks moving forward in a positive way. So do I think that I would do it from the Bears end? Absolutely. Name your price. Because especially, I wouldn't say that for every team. I wouldn't say, speaking of Chicago, here's your silence. I wouldn't say that for every team. But I think with the Bears, they've already been pushed into such a corner that they're in a position to make a desperate move. And I would rather have it be a desperate move for an elite quarterback than a somewhat less desperate move for a guy that doesn't move the needle at all. If you're willing to move a first-round pick for Carson Wentz, which I think they might have been if Carson Wentz's people had been more receptive to the idea, why wouldn't you move 4 first-round picks for Russell Wilson? Like, I would just rather have the real quarterback if I'm going to be giving up actual assets, even if you're paying out the nose to do it.
Can we say that if the Bears get Russell Wilson, will be the first real quarterback in the Chicago City? Can you say that?
At least like 70 years or something like that.
In my lifetime, and I would say even, beyond my lifetime, I think that if you think about the history of the position in Chicago, I mean, Jim McMahon played in the 80s and he was like a solid quarterback, but until after Jim McMahon, there was 1 good year of Eric Kramer. And then when Jay Cutler came, I mean, that was the most promising quarterback the Bears have added that I can remember. And he was never much more than average. I mean, for the most part, the Bears were still toiling in that like 18th to 22nd range offensively pretty much every single year. The Bears have never had a quarterback like Russell Wilson since I've been alive, and not even close to Russell Wilson. Yeah. I mean, again, I think that if you look at the numbers offensively, like the advanced numbers, the Bears have had a above average offense twice in the past 20 years. It was in 2013 when they had that really weird stretch with Josh McCown, where he was just playing out of his mind and eventually got paid by the Bucs as a result. And then they were slightly above average in 2018 when they had some bells and whistles and Mitchell Trubisky running around. That's it. Those are the two above average years since 2000. So we are not used to even acceptable offensive play in the city of Chicago. Russell Wilson will be a very different experience.
Look, you are talking with a Ravens and a Steelers fan, but for example, my favorite player of the old school is Walter Payton. And every time that I watch some video, I look, oh my gosh, just one man here working his tail off. I cannot believe. We won't talk about draft today, but we know that you love offensive lineman. Did you play as offensive lineman in the high school?
I did. Yeah, I played offensive defensive line in high school.
This is where you take this passion. You like to watch a lot of videos of offensive line. Can we say you are O-line nerd?
That's fair to say, yes. Yes, I very much enjoy it. And I like defensive linemen too. I play defensive line too. I love watching pass rushers and things like that, but I think it's easier for people to like pass rushers because it's easier to understand when they're good and not, you know?
Yeah.
When you watch Myles Garrett, you don't have to do a lot of guesswork and understanding whether he's good, or Aaron Donald. For offensive linemen, I think it requires a little bit more study and a little bit more nuance, and that's why you have fewer guys that I think would kind of expound themselves as offensive line nerds or offensive line people, just because it takes a little bit more digging to understand who's actually good and not. You can't just look at the stat sheet.
So in this year's class, do you have maybe you've seen someone that have jumped out to you that you want to get to watch the film later? And is that guy Rashawn Slater or someone else?
I definitely do want to watch him a little bit more. I mean, guys that I really respect and that have dug into the draft tape already, guys like Brandon Thorne, Duke Manyweather, who is Slater's trainer, is a buddy of mine. So, I mean, I've heard a decent amount about him. I am very much looking forward to watching him a little bit more. Landon Dickerson is somebody that people love. He was a center at Alabama. My buddy Brandon at his site, Trench Warfare, he does a really nice, interesting newsletter. They did a film segment with Landon recently that was great. I thoroughly enjoyed that. The guy from Oklahoma State, whose name I can't remember right now, apparently is like a nice big physical presence. I'm really looking forward to watching him. But yeah, the draft is a late March and April kind of pursuit for me. I do it the same way NFL teams do. I take care of free agency first, and then I start worrying about the draft after it's over.
Talking about O-line, Robert, who's your favorite in the NFL? You have someone that you watch it and you always, oh my gosh, you forget the game, just watch that guy play.
I used to feel that way about Marshall Yanda when he played. He was just somebody that I love to watch play. I mean, during the games, it's hard to watch them every single play just because it's a little more jammed in there. But I remember, the stretch when the Ravens had Marshall Yanda at one guard and Kelechi Osemele at the other guard. I would just sit there and wait for the All-22 film to come out of those games to watch those two guys play together. And I mean, their offensive line at that point, I think Matt Burke was there. I mean, they had a really nice group of players. I loved watching them play. Right now, there are a bunch of guys. I mean, watching Trent Williams is just a blast. He's such a fun player. Jason Kelce, when some of those really good Eagles teams were kind of rolling, I really enjoyed watching him. I mean, it's so many guys. I'm trying to think of some others that I really like. Mitchell Schwartz, I loved watching play. I think that he just had such a subtlety to his game that I really enjoyed. And then the right guard for the Browns, Wyatt Teller, is just watching him right now is a blast. I mean, he's just such a monster. I mean, he's just built in a way you don't normally see from guys at that position. He's just knocking people around. So there are a lot of guys that, even though it's a little bit difficult to watch interior linemen on the broadcast tape, when I dig in a little bit later in the week, there are definitely people that I enjoy going back and watching as often as I can.
You can go, Mateus.
No, well, changing a bit here. You've obviously been around for a while. I know you've been with Grantland, with the Ringer, now with Athletic, at the time with Sports Illustrated. Do you have any articles, in this journey you've been on that you're really proud of, that you've got to profile a player, or you've got to talk about something really curious that you've always enjoyed and always wanted to dig deep into, that you remember, that that you're proud of, especially proud of?
I'm thinking. It's hard for me because as soon as I finish one, it's like over. I don't really think
about it. Let's go to the next one.
I have a very hard time enjoying things. It's a personal problem of mine. I think some ones that jump out to me. I wrote a story about JJ Watt in like 2013, where I got to spend a little bit of time with him, and I talked to a lot of people in his life, and that one I was proud of, especially in the moment. I really enjoyed that. There's a random story that I wrote. These are all stories when I was younger. I think I might have gotten worse at writing, but when I was younger, I did a story. I went to Missouri, went to the University of Missouri, and people don't nationally know as much about this. College sports fans do, but I think the casual sports fans don't really understand how really, really vicious the rivalry is between Missouri and Kansas. I mean, it is like a truly hate-filled rivalry. And Missouri was moving to the SEC, so they were leaving Kansas's conference. So it was the last time that those two were slated to play basketball against one another. And they happened to be like the number 2 and 4 teams in the country. And I went to Kansas to write about the game and write about the history of the rivalry. And I was really proud of that story. And I thought it turned out really well. That was one that I weirdly remember. I wrote a story about Kyle Shanahan in 2016 that I feel like was kind of prescient. I said that I thought he was the next great coach in the NFL. I just thought that what he had done with that Falcons team, and just overall, I think I was a little bit earlier on that Falcons team than a lot of other people. Mid-season that year, they were hovering around 500, I want to say. And in our second half predictions at the Ringer, I said, I think that team is going to win the Super Bowl. And they pretty much did.
Got really close.
So I just saw something in what they were doing. And I've always liked Kyle's offenses. I mean, you asked Nate Tice, who I do my podcast with. In 2014, I was bugging him about the Browns and what that Browns offense looked like. And they weren't very good, but I just love some of the stuff that they were doing. And so even back to like 2009, when he was the coordinator in Houston and Matt Schaub was throwing for 4,500 yards. So I think that story I wrote about Kyle in 2016, would jump out to me. But yeah, again, it's when I forget them. There have been so many that I'll kind of stumble back onto, and I can't believe I wrote that. I totally forgot that I wrote that. And I think it's for a lot of reasons. Like as soon as it's done, I'm like tired of it. You work on them for so long, even if it's a couple weeks, and you just feel like you've seen it over and over and over again. And when I put them to bed, it's on to the next one. So again, it leads to just this constant cycle of never really enjoying the work that you're doing. So that's the nice part about the podcast. It's a little chiller. So
yeah, I'm gonna look the one about the basketball rivalry up. I want to read.
That was fun.
We're gonna look for these articles and put here in the description of the show. But my favorite was one that you worked on 2016, I think, about Philip Rivers, the best quarterback in the 2004 class.
I think that was 2015.
2015? Yes. I don't remember.
2015. I want to say it was 2015 because I think I wrote that in like August, and I can remember writing it or finishing it at a place I only lived in for 1 year in Eagle Rock in Los Angeles. That's how I remember this stuff. It's not like I remember writing it at the table at that house, and I only lived there in 2015. And I think it was after that really nice season he had. Actually, it might have been 2014 that I wrote that. Let me look. Now I'm really curious.
Yeah, I don't remember that as exactly. It
was 2014. It ran on my birthday in 2014. So even that is wrong. I'm misremembering everything now. So I like that story. I like that story a lot. That was the first time I ever talked to Philip Rivers. Was when I got to write that story, and I vividly remember meeting him for the first time, and he was much bigger than I thought he would be. For whatever reason, he just never struck me as a big man. And then you stand next to him and it's like, oh, this is why he's never been hurt. Like the guy is just a mammoth person. And he was wearing brown Crocs. I'll never forget that. He just had these brown Crocs on. There's this 6'5" man talking in this very lolling Alabama accent. And it stuck with me. I always enjoyed talking to him. I mean, we probably had, I don't know, 5 or 6 conversations over the course of over his career. And it was a thing where every time I'd go to training camp, even if I wasn't working on something specifically about him, I would ask to just touch base with him and talk with him because he was always somebody I loved talking about football with. He was such a smart football person. And if you've ever listened to my podcast, there are moments where you can just tell that I'm getting so excited that I can't really contain myself. And I just start tripping over words and using my hands a lot. And that's like having a conversation with Phil Rivers. That's exactly what it's like. Talking to him about football is exactly like you'd think it would be to talk with football about him. So whenever we would talk, it was kind of like these dueling bits of excitement going back and forth. So I think I always saw him as like a kindred spirit and how overly excited and exuberant we would get about the game.
Robert, we know we are getting close to finish our time here. We just have 5 fast questions. We have a section here is the chauffeur pass. We ask and you answer faster than Tarek Hill. Okay, will be easy. But before that, I want to ask you did you know that we have a lot of because in Brazil we call American football. It's not football. We put because it's different for us. But you know that we have a lot of fans of football of the NFL. Did you know that?
I've learned that recently. It's actually been something that I've really appreciated is that I've gotten notes from several different people who watch the league in Brazil, who are fans of the league in Brazil. I didn't know it had this much of a following down there. And I love that. It's honestly one of my favorite things is to get messages or, notes of appreciation or whatever from people watching and listening in foreign countries, because it really does seem like the podcast is a way to help them understand the sport in ways that they hadn't before. And that's my favorite thing. If we can teach somebody about the game in a way that helps them appreciate it more than they already do, that's all I'm trying to do. So I've gotten a lot of notes from people that live in Brazil and watch the sport from Brazil in the last year or so. And I love that. That's been really cool for me.
And the Bears are about to get a lot of Brazilian fans. They've given Brazilian legend Carlos an extension. So
That's right.
Bears Legion.
Is he like a big thing in Brazil? Is he like the famous Brazilian player? Are there a lot of Kairos Santos fans watching the NFL in Brazil?
Yeah, when he got cut, people got really mad.
Yes, sure. And every time that he scores, the guys here, it's different. It's totally different than USA. A touchdown, they really screen a field goal of a Cairo field goal. They really screen 2, like say it's from Brazil. The same thing. I'm gonna send to you you try to listen and understand a little bit. But let's go. Chauffeur pass, Robert. Favorite player
in the league?
In the history, whatever you want.
Oh my God. It's some bear. I don't know who I would want to say. I loved watching Charles Tillman. I think that Charles Tillman is just somebody who has like a really warm spot in all Bears fans' hearts. He was just one of those guys that you never appreciated until he played for your team. He's not a Hall of Famer, but just somebody who I love watching.
Yeah, I think we love it that Peanut Tillman too, because when he forced the fumble was amazing. You can go, Mateus.
You're the best game you've ever been.
Oh, I've gotten so lucky.
You mentioned the Kaepernick game earlier.
It's hard to differentiate between games and moments because there have been so many cool moments that I've gotten. I was there for the Malcolm Butler interception. I was sitting in that end zone. I was there for the Patriots comeback against the Falcons. I was there at the Minneapolis Miracle when Stephon Diggs scored the touchdown against the Saints. I've gotten to see some really cool football games. it's really hard for me to say. I think the most fun I've probably had covering a game might have been the Eagles-Patriots Super Bowl, just because all of the offense and that Eagles team was just so fun. So that's hard. I've gotten very lucky in the big-time games that I've gotten to cover. I was there when the Seahawks had the onside kick in the 2014 NFC Championship game against the Packers. I mean, it's that game was wild. I've gotten very, very lucky. I've picked some good ones over the years.
Favorite draft class?
2011, I think, is just unbeatable. Just the defensive players that came out that year. I mean, and Julio Jones and AJ Green. I mean, I just think to me, it's the most stacked draft class of my lifetime, or definitely since I've been paying attention to the league like this.
This one was easy. You went very fast.
Yeah. And as a journalist, what was your favorite moment? Like a special moment, a special interview, a special moment that you were part of that you always take with you?
I think one of my favorite moments is the live podcast I did with Barnwell in 2015 in Brooklyn. It was the first thing like that we had gotten to do, and just seeing a live audience react to the show. And Mina did it with us, and this is like before Mina was Mina Kimes. And we had such a good time, and we had just laughed all night, and that was really cool. I think that being able to, sometimes when you do the podcast, you just think it goes into the ether and no one hears it, and there's no real-time feedback or anything like that. But doing it live, you see people. You see that people actually listen and they appreciate it, and I think that was a very cool moment. That one will stick with me for a really long time.
And to wrap our show, what you would say to someone who is starting a career journalist today and want to work as an NFL beat writer? What's your advice?
Be genuinely curious. I mean, just always want to know the answers to the questions that you're asking. Don't go through the motions at any point. Use the access that you have, especially if you are already a reporter about the league. Use the access you have to your advantage. You look at some of the beat writers around the NFL now that cover teams. Like, I think Jordan Rodriguez is a perfect example, who covers the Rams for us at The Athletic. You watch or listen to Jordan as she goes about her job, and she never lets a bit of that access go. Anytime she has a coach or a player or someone from the front office or anyone that she can ask a question to, she makes the most of it. And I think that too often people think that this is just a job where you punch a clock, and if you go through the motions, that's okay. And I think that the people who understand that their relationships and their accessibility to these players and these coaches and these people are a way to help teach people about the sport if they ask the right questions. So I think that trying to do the best that you can to use those pathways to your advantage is definitely the thing that I would try to maximize, for sure.
Great advice.
Yes.
Because I think it applies a lot to journalism in general.
In general, yes.
In Brazil, you're not going to have people really covering the NFL here like you do there, but you have with soccer. So, I feel like, you can talk about that better than me. But I think like it's a lot of the same,
We just have soccer. Unfortunately, we just have soccer, for real. And Robert, thanks so much to being with us today. Guys. And I hope we talk again and sooner or later, and have a good off-season, because we know that NFL reporter don't have off-season, a real off-season.
It's off-season's already come and gone. I had my week off after the Super Bowl. Now we're back at it. So you guys have a good one. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, thank you. Have a good day, my friend.
All right, see ya.
Bye-bye.